Hello everyone, Mugiwawa here, and today we have a new devlog on Infinite Muneris, and we are going to talk about the rework of two mechanics in the Infinite Muneris world. So let's jump into the game, and I will explain what are the mechanics that have changed. And so the first one that actually have changed is the deployment. As you can see, like here, now when we are entering into the game, there is already obstacle placed on the board. And we can't place those obstacles anymore. The only thing you can place is actually like your agent. And also like you can see that you don't see the enemy agent anymore. So basically how it works now is the obstacles are placed based on a predefined map, which is selected by the second player. So the player that is going to play second actually decides on which map we are going to fight. So that's a way to compensate the first player advantage. Basically, like, people are getting the initiative because they are attacking the enemy team on their territory, and since you are attacking the enemy team on their territory, so you have the element of surprise, but they have the advantage of the landscape. So, and then like you are placing your agent blindly. So that means that the enemy is actually like placing their agent at the same time, but you don't see them place their agent. And then when both players have finished placing their agent, they can just click on the button to tell that they have finished, and they have to wait for the opponent or the timer to go to the end. And the combat can start. When the combat starts, the agent appears, and you can now start your first turn. So why this change has been made from the previous one that were like where both players can select two obstacles, and then they had to place their obstacles on the field and one by one. And this change has been made for multiple reasons. And the first, like the biggest one to me, it was that this introduced like a lot of decision making, which can be a very good thing into a game, but it was a very confusing decision making. Like after the extensive like playtesting I've made with players, like most of the time, players were actually like, I don't really know where to place them, so I'm gonna to place them here, or I'm gonna to stack them because it seems to be strong. But in the end, at the end of the match, like it was very, very hard to tell if you actually placed your obstacles in a good way that helped you win or not. And so you had like all these decisions, all these possibilities without actually any good way of knowing if it's impactful or not. And so to me, that's just like put pressure and confusion on the player without actually feeling like rewarding, because you don't know if it's good or not what you're doing. And so that wasn't good. On top of that, like all this back and forth positioning stuff, we're actually like making like the deployment phase like take a very, very, very long time before actually entering into the game. And so if you spend like a long time for benefit that you don't really know they're actually there or not, well, it doesn't feel great. Like you're just spending a lot of time to do basically nothing. And on top of that, since it was like very, very, very tough to place your obstacles, most of the time you were just placing your obstacles and your agent in a way to just protect you from the early game. And that meant that like for the mid and late game, like the placement of the obstacles wasn't really like great to interact with. And so this is why I decided to go for pre-made maps with like blind deployment. So all those like confusion decision are like a lot alleviated, because like for instance, like now you know, okay, I'm playing against a team that have like a lot of range. I'm gonna pick a map that kind of block the vision most of it. Or if I have like a team that need to go into contact where the enemy gonna try to set up, I'm gonna play as like a way where there is like some safe ground. So now it's a little bit easier to take a decision because like the map have an overall scheme. And also like in terms of deployment, like it wasn't adding much, being able to deploy after the order. And so like the blind deployments feel actually like more streamliney. Like you just get into the game, you place your unit, trying to think about what your opponent is doing, and then you just jump right into the game. So that feels a lot more fluid. So there is like a cons of this solution is that actually like put a lot of workload onto my side, because I have now to design the maps and make sure they're all balanced and that some maps don't completely break certain agent. But that's something I'm aware of, and that's something I will pay attention to. So no worries on that. Now let's go into the second aspect that I've changed, and this change concern Poison and Regen. So Poison and Regen was one of the bonus and malus that was working a bit differently from the others, that actually were like triggering at the beginning of the turn of the agent and taking or healing the amount of damage based on the stat they had on them. That meant that Regen was very bad, because like when you applied Regen, it was like to actually like save a unit. That's a defensive stat, but you actually had to wait a full enemy turn before you get the benefit from the Regen. So that was very slow, almost like very impractical. So you actually have to stack Regen beforehand, but if you stack Regen beforehand, then the enemy just don't attack the guy with Regen, because there is no point, it's just going to Regen. So it was like not feeling great. And on the Poison, it was working quite alright, but it still felt a little bit underwhelming at the point that you actually have to do like a full Poison team, otherwise it was not worth it. So if you reach like a certain threshold of Poison, it started to be kind of alright, but still very, very, very slow and hard, and so only like a very specific team were able to pull that off, and that's not what I want. I want like every single mechanics to be strong, like taken alone, and then sometimes you have synergy that amplify that, but it's not that only if you play like the full synergy then the mechanics make sense. I think that's really bad design if you have this type of mechanic in your games that kill the creativity, the variability and all of that. So that was something I was willing to address. And so what I've changed is that now Poison and Regen actually trigger after your agent made an action. So let's just like show that to you. So here you can see that my action at the beginning of the fight has 11 poison. This 11 poison come from like the smoky little present that apply poison 19 to the enemy agent with the highest health. But I also have Marilyn that have like a fight star that apply regen and armor to the ally agent with the most health. So Axon received 19 poison, 8 regen, 11 poison. And so now if I use Mag Punch, for instance, on Vicky, just to show you the interaction, so I deal damage and now the poison proc, and I take 11 damage. So every time I use an action, I take damage on my Axton. So now poison is actually like very strong to deny high level agent, because level 3 agent want to use their 3 action each turn. So that means that the poison is going to proc 3 times, and the poison ignore like strength, weakness, armor, vulnerable. So that could be good if like they have a very strong like defensive lineup with a lot of armor. Now you can use poison to actually counter that. So that's very nice, and that's really like it's a buff to poison. But of course, like then the quantity of poison that you apply has been tuned down to reflect this change. And now we have also like the regen, and now the regen, like you can apply the regen, for instance, on this Vicky, and apply like regen 10, and now every time Vicky is going to use a spell, she's going to heal 10. And so now that means that you can actually benefit from the regen the turn you're applying it, making it a viable defensive solution. So that works very well, and now you can actually play with the regen and trying to keep your agent alive. When they're close to death, you can actually use it to protect them. And so that's make the regen also interesting. And so now that poison is also more prevalent, having regen to counter poison, it's fine. same thing the other way. So now we have like a new integration of the system. However, by implementing this change, there was a bit of side effect that appeared. And for instance, the poison, when the unit had a lot of poison on it, well, the simple counter was simply to stop doing any action with the unit. If you don't do action, you don't take damage. If you don't take damage, you don't die. And so that meant that the poison team had to apply a lot of poison, but at the same time have ways to achieve the unit besides the poison, because otherwise like the enemy can just like not do any action. And also like on the regen part, that meant that even if your unit has nothing to do, you still had to use your action to benefit from the regen. So in terms of like quality of life, it wasn't that great, because like you feel forced to do an action that has no real impact but that heals you, so that wasn't so great. So one of the change I decided to make after like, I don't like basically like this no play game, because like if a mechanics actually like force you to not play the game, well, that's not fun. Like you want to play with your agents. If you're just like looking in the blank of each other, like what's the point? Like, and so one change that has been made is that now at the end of the turn, you actually trigger the amount of poison of healing based on the remaining action your agent has. That means that if you have poison, you're like using your action or not is actually the same thing almost. So you better use your action. And in the regen, like you're not forced not to do like dummy action just to get the regen. You will get the regen nonetheless, or even if like you didn't get enough time to finish your turn, you still will trigger all the regen that are there, even if you didn't get the time to play the action there. So I felt I made this change and it felt very good now. The poison and regen I think are in a really good spot, with the added benefit that now a trigger based on action, it's much closer to how the other mechanics worked. And so now in terms of balance, every single mechanics, every single bonus and malus are close to the same, which means that like previously I had a problem with the cleanse and debuff balance, because I had like poison and regen and the rest of the mechanics that weren't very aligned in terms of power. And so that means that cleanse and debuff were like impacting all those things in the same way, but they actually have different value, and that wasn't like very feeling super good. And now that everything has been put in line, it works much better. So I'm really happy with those two changes. And I want to finish this video on a little like a lesson I kind of learned specifically on the deployment side of the rework. In the scientific community that I was working previously, we had a saying that was like, kill your darlings. What does that mean? It's basically like when you're working on scientific stuff, like you always have ideas, you're trying like to push the limit of the knowledge, so of course you're like trying to have like weird ideas and trying to make them happen. And sometimes like you have an idea and you think this idea is super great, like it's amazing. But then you test it, you analyze it, you try to make it work and it doesn't work, or it basically like the result tell you like your idea is dumb, it's not good. And so here you have to actually like get to the realization that, okay, my idea wasn't great. I have to find another one, I have to move on, I have to kill my darlings. Even though like this idea like was my darlings, I really liked it, I thought that it was amazing, well it actually is not, so let's move on. I have to kill my darlings. And I think that this saying actually is also very important in game design. Like if I look like this idea of like leaving the control into the player's hand to choose their obstacles and then place them on the map, I thought the idea was brilliant, very, very good. But in the end, after like testing a lot and trying like, I spent like almost 2 weeks like trying scrambling ideas around, trying to improve it, change it a little bit, do alteration to finally find the way that it was working, because the idea is so great, it's impossible, there is no way, there is not a way to make it work. And I had to come to the realization that, okay, I have to kill my darlings, I have to move on, I have to find something else, because it's not working in the setup of Infinite Muneris. And that's just the way it is. It could be maybe a good idea in another game or with another implementation, but I couldn't find it. I didn't felt it was the right game for it. And so yeah, I just had to kill it and move on. So it's very important to, like, even if like you're really into an idea, sometimes it's important to take a step back and actually like try to be objective about not what you want as the game designer, but what your game is telling you. You have to listen to it because it actually tells you a lot of things. So thank you everyone for watching this video this week. I hope you have all a great Sunday, a great week afterwards, and I see you soon.